Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the next session of ConsumerOpps. I'm Craig Sainsbury from Market Eye. Before I introduce Neil Verdal-Austin, I'd just like to update you all on a scheduling mix-up. I had put, my mistake here, 11 o'clock on for Forbidden Foods to present. They're not presenting at this time. It is now Somnomed. So sincere apologies for people who had dialed in for Forbidden Foods. We're going to update a schedule and get them to present ASAP after this, so please stay tuned. So again, sincere apologies for anyone who was looking to dial in for Forbidden Foods. Now with that, our presenter today is CEO of Somnomed, Neil Verdal-Austin. Neil, thank you for taking the time to talk to us today.
No worries at all, Craig. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. So we're going to do a little bit of a chat rather than a page turn on the slides. So please lodge your questions as per the instructions. I've got a list here which I'll start to talk you through. So Neil, I think it'd be great to start off with a couple of minutes overview of Somnomed, the journey that you've taken and how long you've been on board with the company.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Craig. Somnomed's a medical device company that basically treats obstructive sleep apnea with a custom-made oral appliance, as opposed to, I guess, what's typically used out there, which is CPAP, continuous positive airway pressure. It's an ISO 13485 regulated, FDA approved Class 2 device. Somnomed's been around for 15 odd years now. We trade in 28 countries around the world. And I guess our strategic objective at the end of the day is to grow the sector of oral appliances through our mantra that we sort of live and breathe and sleep by, if I can say that, treatment focused and technology driven. Excellent.
And your journey with the company, Neil, how long have you been on board with Somnomed?
Yeah, I've been with Somnomed for 13 years, just over 13 years now. So 10 as CFO and just over 3 as CEO.
Excellent. And you mentioned before the OSA market. I'll shorten it to the acronym of OSA, which is what Somnomed looked to treat. Can you give a little bit more of a background on that? How large is that market, and I guess breaking it down into any sort of further, gender or age demographics that you can see out there for that market?
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that in all the research that we see, and the latest research is a BIS research report done in August 20, that this market is significant, large, and the difficulties to mainly access to the market itself. Most of the commentators and research done show that in 2019, 2020, the market's about $4 billion US. That's in total sort of diagnostics and treatment. And the anticipated growth is to about $11 billion by 2030. When it comes to OSA and obstructive sleep apnea treatment, there are nearly a billion patients in treatment currently. And of that, there's always a distinction between the severity of the OSA, mild, moderate, and severe. Mild, which is Somnomed's sort of sweet spot, is around about 55% of that patient number in treatment.
Right. And then just in those definitions, so by mild, is that number of times they're waking up per night? What's the sort of the classification between those?
Yes, exactly. So mild is anywhere up to 15 sleep interruptions per hour. Moderate is between 15 and 30 of the same interruptions per hour, and above 30 is classified as severe. And these are interruptions where your airway narrows or collapses. You lose breath, you lose oxygen to the brain, and it stops and interrupts. It just interrupts your airflow completely for a period of at least 10 seconds, and that's called an interruption for OSA purposes.
Great. And then you've mentioned the two treatment paths, and again, I'll just stick with the acronyms rather than getting tongue-tied on the full explanation. But the COAT, which is Somnomed, versus the CPAP, which a lot of people would be maybe, I guess, more aware of with the masks that get worn. Can you just go into a little bit more detail in terms of the differences between the two treatment paths and what part of the market they're actually trying to tackle?
So the treatment itself, CPAP, the continuous positive airway pressure, is, as you've just described, Craig, it's a mask that people wear over their nose and mouth. It's connected to tubes, connected to a machine and plugged in to the wall. It blows pneumatic air down your airway, thereby keeping your airway open. Oral appliances is something completely different. It's like a mouth guard that you wear over your mouth, upper and lower, and it moves your lower jaw or the mandible slightly forward at night and thereby opening up the airway mechanically. Very comfortable, very easy to use compared to CPAP in most cases. The patient pathway is very, very similar in most of the markets that we operate in. It's complicated, unfortunately, and we're trying to break down that complication, make it more effective and more efficient. But the patient pathway is normally towards your GP or your PCP if you're feeling tired. And I mean, who isn't these days? You go and get a sleep test. Sleep tests today are also very, very easy. They're home sleep tests. They're not in lab or in hospital sleep tests anymore. So you stay in your own bed, you have a sleep test with a little sort of connective watch, like a few nodes connected to your head and chest. And with that, they diagnose whether you're mild, moderate, or severe, or not at all. You may not have sleep apnea at all. And then the pathways are different. The sleep physician then decides, depending on the severity and other little signs on your sleep report, whether you should get treated by a CPAP and therefore go to a DME, a durable medical equipment supplier, or a dentist to be fitted for a custom-made oral appliance. And there is the difference in the supply or the fulfillment, if you like, in the pathway for patients.
Yeah. And with what you've described, I mean, the continuous open airways therapy seems significantly less intrusive for the patient and I guess able to probably talk, drink, etc.
Yes.
The patient have any choice in terms of what they're looking for, or as you were saying before, in terms of how it gets passed down through the physicians, etc., it's more a prescribed approach to them?
Yeah, at the moment, it seems to be a more of a prescribed and slanted towards CPAP prescription for most patients, even if you're mild, moderate, to severe. And that's what we're trying to change. I think that the oral appliances, when we hear about the effectiveness, the comfort, and patients remaining in treatment, they prefer an oral appliance. There's no doubt about that. I think it's very cumbersome, very difficult to wear when you're talking about CPAP all night and every night. And remember that CPAP, their sort of adherence rates are pretty low. It's quite obvious that patients may start off trying to wear CPAP and 4 hours into the night. Normally, typically, when you go to the bathroom, you don't put it back on. And that's the more dangerous, more significant half of the night that you do need treatment. And I think that oral appliances fulfill that role in that most patients wear our devices all night, every night, and therefore actually remain in treatment. Even if the efficacy is slightly less, the effectiveness over all night, every night, and the effectiveness over a month and a year and 2 years is greater.
Yeah. And I think we'll come back to that in the end, because it's a really good point. And you've got some great technology that's going to come out and capture that. But I'll step through a few more questions before we come back to that. How important is the cost dynamic? We talk about the comfort for Somnomed and for Coke versus CPAP. What's the, I guess, cost to the patient, and how does that? Is there a different channel through health insurance companies, et cetera, that sort of channel people down a different or a single route?
Yeah, this is something that Somnomed's been working on for the last 15 years, and I think it'll work on it for the next 15 years. But reimbursement and dealing with insurers and making sure that the sort of cost dynamic or the cost economics makes sense for oral appliances is one of our hallmarks, if you like, one of the cornerstones of what we're doing as a company. Certainly, there's a difference, and the difference is quite simple. Certainly, with CPAP, you can rent a CPAP machine or buy a CPAP machine, and a CPAP machine and the masks and the hoses are pretty generic. Anybody can fit or wear a certain mask. Of course, that's one of the issues, is the masks tend to, not fit everybody's face so easily. But there is a difference with CPAP. Buying the CPAP machine generally around the world costs around $2,000, but you can rent a CPAP machine. Oral appliances are different. Oral appliances are a custom-made device, and so therefore that needs to be fitted to your teeth. There's work needed to be done, obviously, at the beginning. It needs a dentist. We need to check that you are orally suitable to wear a device, that we're not going to cause any harm to any patient while treating their OSA, and that's really important, and the reason that you do need a proper process and a custom-made, comfortable device. And there you need to pay for that device upfront. So there's an upfront cost to an oral appliance like ourselves, anything between $1,500 to $2,000 around the world, but then that's it. You're done. There's no more cost to the insurer or to the patient. And so when we look at managed care contracts that we have within the US and Holland and Belgium, now Germany, and maybe Switzerland coming, those contracts directly with insurers are only because the insurers have done extensive work with Somnomed to prove that over a 5-year period, the cost of a Somnodent is probably half of a CPAP machine, even rented or purchased over time, because of the ongoing need to buy masks and replace hoses and all the consumer products that are involved with CPAP.
Yeah. And you mentioned some geographies there in terms of the European and the US market. Is there any significant difference in terms of that reimbursement pathway between those two regions?
Yes, they're similar, but there's some differences. Within the European sector that we trade in, a lot of the sleep physicians and dentists are employed within the hospital sector, within the hospital group, within the socialist healthcare networks that are funded by the insurers. And so that lends itself to a more cohesive, if you like, and tighter insurance plan and policy schedule when it comes to the payment for oral appliances in that market. So with that said, that sends messages to the consumers that really don't pay for anything in most European markets towards the provision of this type of healthcare, because it avoids all of those nasty comorbidities down the line. And so we see a faster acceptance and adoption of oral appliances within that jurisdiction. When it comes to North America, there is reimbursement and Medicare and Medicaid payments for certain of the oral appliance sector commodities. And certainly also within the private sector, within your own Blue Cross Blue Shield or Aetna plans, depending on your plan itself, in the private sector, oral appliances are also covered to a certain extent.
Yeah. Probably a good chance just to, wrap that into your key end markets. So I've talked about North America, talked about Europe. We've got Asia Pac as well. Yeah. What's the rough split of revenue between those three regions to give the listeners a bit of a feel for where the products are going to?
At the moment, I would say revenues are around 55-60% in Europe, around 30-odd to 35% in North America, and then 5 to 10% in the APAC region is the general mix so far. So we have, in our view, some work to do in both North America and APAC to drive those revenues up to make sure that there's a reasonable, better split, I think, of revenues in the future to come.
Yeah. And you mentioned growing in APAC, obviously clearly a massive people market. India, China, was it sort of half of the world's population residing in those two regions? Is there markets you can penetrate in? I mean, obviously, clearly there's OSA in those markets. Are there any major treatment pathways at the moment, or they are really just exceptionally immature and emerging markets from a treatment standpoint?
They are definitely a future market sector for us, Craig. There's no doubt. It's just a matter of when and the matter of timing for Somnomed. They're pretty immature markets. They're pretty complex markets, and I think we may have to adopt a slightly different distribution sales channel to market model in those particular geographies for the future. So we're looking at that quite carefully in the next sort of 2 to 3 years. Right now, what we're developing and what we've developed with our technology is to make sure that gets rolled out, that gets implemented across the geographies we currently have. And so we deepen the penetration in those markets before we go and add further geographies to the bag. Yeah,
thanks. I guess it'd be remiss not to ask about COVID. I think we're all sick of it, but clearly in terms of an oral device, looking at dentist treatments, we all know how that sector's been impacted over the past couple of years. Maybe a minute or two in terms of how it had impacted your business and the recovery pathway that you're seeing out of that at the moment.
Yeah, and look, unfortunately, and I mean, as many of our investors and maybe your current readers have seen, within the healthcare sector, it's been heavily affected by COVID. We have most of our drive and most of our business drivers come from sleep physicians who prescribe oral appliance and or CPAP therapy to either the DME or the dentist. Sleep physicians are trained respirologists, pulmonologists, and so therefore with COVID have been pretty much redirected to helping COVID patients, rightly so, in most of the hospital sectors around the world during the pandemic. So they have lessened their time towards sleep and increased their time towards the COVID pandemic. So that has meant we haven't been able to continue to drive that pipeline of referred patients to our dental network. And at the same time, some of the dentists who have remained open have patients who are just nervous about going out in the pandemic and having oral appliances fitted, even if the treatment was ready for them, and have postponed or cancelled those treatments. So we've seen a disruption, certainly in the early parts of the pandemic and through the second Omicron wave, predominantly in Europe. But what we're seeing right now, currently, and again, currently, we don't know what the future might hold, but currently what we're seeing is an easing of that, a regaining of access into the hospital, sleep physicians and dental appointments ramping up again, and hopefully a return to some sort of normal healthcare sector for us when it comes to treatment of OSA and having access to both dentists and sleep physicians.
Yeah, fantastic. I think that's a nice segue to go back to something that you mentioned before, which was the effectiveness equation. So, compliance of the product, how much you wear it through the night. You've said before that one of the issues that's been there with Somnomed products is the lack of the ability to track that data that CPAP was having. But to solve that, and you can see the little banner in the background there with Rest Assure, it's a new product, or I guess new technology that's been introduced into the Somnomed fold. Can you talk us through Rest Assure, what I guess it's trying to solve and how it's going to go about solving that data dynamic?
Absolutely, Craig. Of course we will. We're very excited about Rest Assure. I mean, this has been 2.5 years in the making at Somnomed. One of the things that we did, we went and did some research with about 250 odd sleep physicians in the US and said, what are the barriers to prescribing more oral appliances? Why is it that everybody gets CPAP? And the answers came back resoundingly, and we looked at those answers and said, well, if it's an economic issue and there's a lack of overnight monitoring, one of the things that we can do right now is to start looking at why our device is let's call it a dumb device. Why don't we make it a connected or an intelligent device? Why doesn't the device have miniature sensors embedded into the device itself? So we're adding technology to the already very positive part that is a custom-made device. Now the technology in a custom-made device means I know it's your treatment because only you can wear the device. A lot of other wearables and nearables and things that do the sort of same monitoring or diagnostics, we don't really know if that attracts the right data to that patient. So we have come up with a concept of miniature sensors built into the device itself in a safe way. Of course, it'll be FDA and CE approved to make sure it is safe for patients. That'll provide data. This data, once downloaded every morning into the docking station, goes to a patient app on their phone. So they have access to their own, of course, data and shows them their sleep night. But also it feeds the portal that goes to the sleep physician and the dentist, and for the first time starts to connect all of the multidisciplinary approach we speak of and action it. Both the sleep physician and the dentist will see every night, all night, or every week or every month, whenever they want to track their patient cohorts, two things. One is the efficacy, proving that the patient's being treated and looking at that AHI measure every night, all night, as well as the compliance. And so therefore, for the first time again, bringing data towards proving the long-term effectiveness of oral appliances and equating that eventually to what CPAP provides those clinicians.
So that sounds like some pretty powerful data to capture over time. And I guess every new patient just continues to add more data to get a big data platform. Yep. You sort of touched on it there, but that's something that you can then take to the regulators, the insurance companies around the world and prove that, the Somnomed product and I guess overall COAT as a concept versus CPAP is delivering, better efficacy and better patient equation at the end of the day.
Exactly. That's the next step. There's certainly a longer strategic view here, and that is not only to connect the sleep physician, patient, and dentist together and prove the effectiveness equation, efficacy and compliance, but also then to take that data. Imagine in 6-12 months' time how many millions of patient hours or nights of data we'll have across the globe, to going to societies, to changing guidelines. Why should the approval of oral appliances only be once you failed CPAP on the back of our data? Why shouldn't mild patients? It should be the reverse. Why shouldn't mild patients get oral appliances first and make sure they remain in treatment and avoid the nasty comorbidities that are far more costly than sleep itself coming down the line, and taking that to insurers and payers and having that debate and that conversation in a short period of time with millions of patient nights, improving finally the effectiveness of oral appliances as against CPAP.
Yeah. And this is something that's unique to Somnomed, right? Like, there's no other competitors in the oral appliance market that's doing this. You've got the run, you've got the advance, and your competitors, something that can really drive your product.
Correct. That's correct.
Yeah. Always get asked this one: pricing differential. You know, is there an ability to, with the data that comes through and showing the greater compliance, ability to send through a greater pricing model?
Look, I think at this stage, and this is what we're working through currently in our organization, is exactly what that pricing and perhaps future reimbursement models could look like. I think that in certain markets, notably APAC and in Europe, we would be able to fetch an increased value and price on the technology that we're offering, because that data is sorely needed and requested by many, many insurance companies who would pay to have that data. They would pay to know that their patient cohort or members are being treated and remain in treatment, and therefore are avoiding the costly comorbidities coming down the line. I think in North America, we may have a mix of models there, and in certain of those market segments, we may not increase the price so that we actually can penetrate and drive a deeper acceptance and adoption of oral appliances over CPAP, which is really lacking in those markets. And we use the technology as a platform to drive volume instead of price.
Yeah. And in the evolution of Rest Assure, we've got this working technology at the moment, undertaking patient trials at present. That data will be back to you as a company some stage this half. Is that sort of the process that we're looking at for the rest of this year?
Yes, absolutely. We've done some validation studies already. We're finishing off our third validation study this month, and hopefully in April that will be completed. The investigators will close, they'll analyze the results, and then they'll publish. And once that's published, we're able to then obviously publish it ourselves and tell the market what those results are looking like. And at the same time, our patent strategy has been completed and the application is in. We've just attended World Sleep in Rome and judged and gauged, I guess, what the technology feedback would be from the market, which was just overwhelmingly positive. I mean, there was absolute acceptance and excitement, and when can we have this from the marketplace itself? It's exactly what the industry needs. It's a tremendous innovation coming from Somnomed. And I think then what we aim to do is submit all of our FDA and CE regulatory submissions by the end of 2022.
Yeah. When can we have this? Great question. Is there an answer in terms of when you expect this to be into commercialization?
Yeah, so look, our plans are, as I've just said, to submit for regulation. And this is all a process of going through all of the regulatory documentation, validation steps, appointing contract manufacturers, doing hundreds and hundreds of tests, validating all the test points, etc., and making sure that gets in by the end of 2022. And then it's up to the regulatory guards. I think at this stage, it'll probably take 2 to 3 months for that to come back. So we're anticipating sort of full commercial readiness, as we've called it, or commercial release, around March of 23.
Great. And you've given some guidance on this one, sort of $8 million worth of capital to go into growth initiatives for this year, all fully funded from existing cash and cash flow coming through the business, guided towards EBITDA neutrality because of the investment into products this year. Going forward, are we expecting an increase in sort of R&D and CapEx for next year, or it's something that can sort of stabilise until we get into that commercial production level?
Certainly what we've guided this year is a one-off to build the technology and to make sure that gets executed and implemented. But this does change the business for the future. We become an electronics, a data-driven, connected appliance software company. And so the capex of the old Somnomed, which used to be $1 million a year, will probably jump to $2 to $3 million a year on an ongoing basis to support that growth and to support that hopefully revenue uptick and CPAP shift towards oral appliances. But we won't, I don't think, return to anything near that we've seen this year at all. It'll become a consistent 2 to 3 million, perhaps 4, depending on various versions as we drive that further technology into the future.
Yeah. Running out of time, Neil, so probably last question to come through. I think there's about 750,000 patients that have been treated by Somnomed, there or thereabout. It's obviously a large captive market to put Rest Assure to. How will you go about sort of getting that captive market? Is there a life cycle that needs to be replaced on the Somnomed product? And then I guess how quickly can that be rolled out through your existing patient network?
Yeah, most of our patients and some of our patients with long-term wearing Somnodents in the Australian market have still got their devices after 8, 9, 10 years. So it really is built to last if you look after it. What happens though is as patients have work done on their teeth, you may need to make an adjustment or change the appliance in the future. And what we'll do now with the new technology is reach out to all of our previous patients through our dentists and our sleep physicians and say, look, there's a campaign at the moment that for the next 3 to 6 months, come and get the new technology, come and get the new device. You want the device, you want to know that you're in treatment, your doctor wants to know you're in treatment. And so there's an opportunity for us to not only look at the future sales, but also look at a past entrenched customer base and to relaunch Rest Assure retrospectively, if you like, into new devices for those patients.
Excellent. Well, that takes us to time. Neil, thank you very much for your time. For those that are on the Zoom, any further questions that we didn't touch on, please reach out to Neil directly or come through myself, and happy to answer any further questions. And again, Neil, thank you so much for your time.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Craig. Thanks for having us.